Greetings everyone, and welcome to Ghostly Broadcast, your dedicated worldwide paranormal channel. This is Timothy, reaching out to you from my quiet farm nestled in the country. Tonight, we're diving into something that's sure to give you goosebumps. We've got 3 authentic experiences from Uber riders worldwide. Prepare yourselves, my friends. We're embarking on a hair-raising exploration. Let's get started. Our first story. Hello, Timothy. My name is Kuong, reaching out to you from a quiet village in Vietnam. I've been tuning into your show for a while now, and I never imagined I'd have a story of my own to tell until this bizarre incident happened. I make a living as an Uber driver, and I can assure you I've never had anything like this happen before. I used to believe that odd and hair-raising stories happen to others, but this event made me question everything. I'm usually not one to believe in the supernatural, but what I went through felt too real and out of the ordinary to overlook. So I decided to share my experience with you and all who are listening, in the hope that maybe someone else out there has experienced something similar. One typical rainy evening, I was driving around in my Uber, keeping an eye out for anyone who needed a ride. As I was driving through a dimly lit street on the outskirts of town, I spotted a distressed-looking woman on the road, waving desperately for me to stop. I pulled over without hesitation and she climbed in, clearly upset. She quickly explained that she needed my assistance in finding her lost son, who had apparently run into the nearby woods, and she feared she would lose him in the night. I felt for her predicament and agreed to lend a hand. She looked relieved and genuinely thankful. So I started to slowly drive along the edge of the forest, following her directions. As we continued our search, she shared more about her son, explaining that he'd bolted into the forest after an argument with her. Despite the unsettling environment, I tried to comfort her, assuring her that we'd find her son soon. About 15 minutes into the drive, she suddenly cried out in happiness and pointed forward. "There he is," she declared. My eyes followed her outstretched finger, and to my surprise, I spotted a young boy standing motionless at the edge of the forest, barely visible in the sparse light. I immediately hit the brakes, bringing the car to a sharp stop. The woman's initial relief seemed to melt away as she gazed at her son, who stood still. Her worry returned, and she pleaded with me to accompany her as she went to check on him. I agreed, and we both exited the car, moving towards the child. As we approached, I couldn't shake this unsettling feeling that something was wrong. The boy's face was expressionless, his eyes vacant. The woman extended her hand towards him, calling out his name. At that moment, I felt an impulse to look around us, and I turned my gaze back towards the car. When I looked back at the mother and her son, I was stunned to find they had disappeared. The chilling emptiness where they had once stood left me standing there, dazed and disbelieving. I made my way back to the car, overwhelmed with confusion, my heart pounding. None of it made any sense, and I tried desperately to find a logical explanation for what I'd witnessed. Was I hallucinating, or was it a terrifying dream? It felt too real to be anything but the truth. Still hoping they might be out there, I decided to look for them once more. I drove up and down the edge of the forest, calling their names into the darkness, praying for an answer. But all I got in return was silence. With a heavy sense of dread, I finally gave up and headed to the nearest police station. I reported the entire unsettling event, fearing the worst for the woman and her son. The police officers exchanged concerned looks as they listened to my story. After checking their records, they told me a woman and her young son had died in a tragic car accident on the same road 2 years prior. The mother had been chasing her son, who had run into the forest after an argument, exactly as she had described in the car. I left the police station that night, my mind spinning from the horrific revelation. I'm not sure if I truly believe in spirits or if my mind was playing tricks on me, but one thing is for sure, I will always remember that night and the desperate woman with her lost son. As the days rolled on, I continued driving for Uber, but I never again experienced anything as unexplainable as that night. However, every time I drove past that forest, I couldn't help but think of them, the mother and son lost and forever wandering in the darkness. The second story. Hi Timothy, it's Tom from the down-to-earth town of Pine Bluff, Arkansas. There's this experience that's been nagging at me. It goes back to a few years ago when I was earning my living as an Uber driver. This incident took place on a Halloween night, and since then it's been lodged in my memory, refusing to fade away. I often find myself replaying that night, feeling a sense of unease creep over me. I thought maybe your ghostly broadcast listeners could provide some insights or opinions about it. So here's the deal. It was late October, the kind of night where the cold settles into your bones. I was out in my car, cruising around town, hoping to get a few rides and make some extra bucks. On Halloween, the city is always buzzing, and as a driver, you get a whole array of passengers, some in high spirits, some in spooky costumes. But this one guy, he was something else. I got a request from a part of town that wasn't exactly friendly, but it was nearby. So I accepted the ride, not knowing what I was in for. Upon reaching the pickup location, there he was, standing alone on the deserted street. He was wearing a mask that was unsettling, to say the least. Accompanying him was a bag that looked anything but ordinary. It was bulky and misshapen, unlike anything I'd seen before. He slowly approached my car, and before I could offer help with his odd-looking bag, he told me sternly not to touch it. It was off-putting, but I complied. Once he was inside my car, the atmosphere seemed to shift. His mask was still on, hiding his face. He wasn't much for conversation either. Every attempt I made at chatting was met with short replies or complete silence. It was like driving with a ghost. As we ventured deeper into the heart of the city, navigating through dimly lit streets and past buildings that had seen better days, he constantly adjusted his mask, never fully revealing his face. His gaze never strayed far from me, making the air in the car even more tense. His strange bag, his curt behavior, and the location on the GPS, a part of town that even locals steered clear of, all added to my growing discomfort. The fact that he had prepaid the ride was a small consolation, as it meant I wouldn't have to deal with cash. But when we arrived at his drop-off point, a derelict factory, my unease hit a new high. There was no sign of life, not a soul in sight. I was beginning to question if I had unknowingly walked into a plot of a horror movie. He asked me to stop the car near a rusted old gate. Without wasting any time, he took his bag from the trunk and vanished into the desolate factory, as if he was swallowed up by the shadows. With him gone, I could breathe a little easier, but my mind was still racing. Who was he? What was in the bag? What was he doing in such a place? I reported the encounter to Uber, and what I found out next added a new layer of worry. Payment for the ride was flagged for fraud. It was a stolen card. This revelation was troubling enough for me to bring the police into the picture. The police took the matter seriously and decided to inspect the factory. They didn't find the man or his bag, but they stumbled upon something unnerving. There were dried bloodstains scattered around the factory grounds. It was an unsettling discovery, made even more disturbing by the fact that no one had been reported missing recently. Despite their best efforts, the police couldn't find anything more about the man or his intentions. Even after all these years, I often find myself going back to that night, replaying that strange encounter. The mystery of the man, his disturbing mask, his odd bag, the stolen card, and the abandoned factory with dried bloodstains. It's like a puzzle that I can't solve. All these elements make me believe there was something dark and unexplained happening. My hope is that by sharing my story with your listeners on Ghostly Broadcast, I might find some closure, some understanding, or at the very least, be able to caution others about the potential peculiarities they may encounter, especially those who drive late into the night. Our third story. Hi Tim, I'm James from Louisiana, USA. There's this wild thing that happened a few weeks back that I can't seem to shake off. I've been driving for Uber, mostly at night for a while now. Night shifts can be spooky at times, but man, this one night was something else. It's stuck in my head and I feel like talking about it might help make sense of it all. So, there I was, around 1 a.m., waiting in my car outside a 24-hour grocery store. The night was dark, with only the harsh, unnatural glow of the store's neon sign giving any light. The whole setup was like a scene straight out of a horror movie. But hey, it's a job, right? So there I was, sitting there trying to shake off the night's odd feeling and waiting for my next ride. After a long wait, this woman appears carrying a few heavy-looking bags of canned food. She seemed like she was about my mom's age and looked like she'd been through tough life. Her clothes were worn, and you could just tell she was struggling to make ends meet. She got into the car and apologized for calling me so late. She told me she needed to get home quick because her kids were waiting for dinner. I could see she was stressed, so I didn't say much, just started driving. She was mostly silent, occasionally staring out of the window, looking kind of lost and sad. We drove around for a bit before ending up in front of this old house that looked like no one had lived there in years. The woman thanked me, got out of the car, and walked into the house. It was pitch black inside, not a single light on. As I pulled away, this feeling of unease hit me, like I'd seen or heard something I shouldn't have. The whole way back, I couldn't shake off this weird feeling. It was like a knot in my stomach. The woman's desperate rush, the way she hardly spoke, the old, run-down house. Everything seemed off. On a whim, I decided to contact Uber about it. I told them what happened, and they said they'd alert the cops because the address was already flagged in their system. Fast forward a few days, I find myself at a small roadside cafe, seated across from a police investigator. He explained that the house was taken over by the bank years ago because the owner couldn't keep up with the mortgage payments. The woman who owned it, he said, matched the description of my passenger. She had died by suicide, leaving 2 little kids behind. Since then, the house had been vacant, with no one moving in or even attempting to buy it. Hearing that gave me the chills. Everything fell into place, but at the same time, it didn't. The investigator also mentioned that when they checked the house after my report, they found old food cans, just like the ones the woman had, but no signs of anyone living there recently. He then shared something that nearly made my heart stop. Apparently, the credit card that was used for the payment didn't exist. It was some kind of system glitch, and they couldn't find any info on the card holder. The whole situation messed with my head. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The woman, the house, the kids, the non-existent credit card. It all lined up with the cop story, but it was just so hard to believe. It was like a puzzle with pieces that fit but didn't make a complete picture. Ever since that night, I've been driving around with a ton of questions and zero answers. Have others had the same experience? Who exactly was the woman? Why did she order an Uber that night? Despite everything, I'm still driving for Uber, always on high alert and wondering if something like this will ever happen again. I felt like sharing this story, hoping someone might have a similar experience to share. Until then, I'll keep cruising these dark roads, always watchful and ready for whatever comes next. Timothy here, thanking you for tuning in to our spine-chilling episode of Ghostly Broadcast, Global Paranormal Station. If you're eager to hear more unsettling, paranormal stories from around the globe, make sure to like and subscribe and join us again for the next experience. Stay safe, stay alert, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are those grounded in reality.